Hi everyone, it's Lauren and welcome to my series on Shakespeare. This video is going to be a focus on Romeo and Juliet. If you would like more of an overview on Shakespeare and some more information on what I'm going to be doing in this series, I will link my introduction video here and also in the description box below. Romeo and Juliet is not based on a true story, but is taken from an Italian tale which was translated into English, into poetry and into prose in the early 1500s, and this is where we believe Shakespeare got his inspiration from. It is about two families who are feuding in Verona, the Montagues and the Capulets. Romeo is from the house of Montague and he falls in love with Juliet, who is a Capulet, and it all ends in tears. So let's start with the character of Romeo. He is the son and heir of Montague. He is a young man, probably in his late teens, and when we first meet him, he's not in love with Juliet at all. He's in love with an unseen woman called Rosaline, who does not return his love. He's persuaded by his friends to sneak into Capulet's masked ball that is going on to meet some other women, to take his mind off Rosaline, and while he is there he meets Juliet. He's generally quite charismatic and witty. Juliet certainly describes him as the most handsome man she's ever seen, but when we first meet him he has a mood on him, he's pining for Rosaline, and we also see a more violent side of him later on in the play. His character is generally quite changeable. The idea of Rosaline as being a love before he sees Juliet can be interpreted in a couple of different ways. The romantic way of looking at it is that Romeo's love for Rosaline is a puppy love. It's not really real, it's just an infatuation. She certainly doesn't return his love, and when he does see Juliet at the ball, he says, "Did my heart love till now, forswear its sight?" And that can be interpreted as him realising that seeing Juliet, this is a true love and not the same as just being obsessed with Rosaline. Or this can be seen as an indicator to Romeo's character, because he's just been in love with someone else, or he's saying that he's in love with somebody else, and then at first sight he sees Juliet and says, "Oh, now I'm in love with her." So this can be interpreted that Romeo is very changeable, that he's inconsistent, and that his love can be quite fickle. Juliet, on the other hand, is 13 years old in this play. She is in the house of Capulet, and she's a very interesting character. When we first see her, she's very quiet, she seems quite obedient to her family, but later on when she's at the ball, she has a bit of banter with Romeo, and they kiss the first time that they meet, and later on we see that she's very intelligent and she's actually quite brave. She goes against the will of her parents, who want her to marry Paris, and she is also very open the whole way through the play to the idea of dying for love, and she seems very ready to risk her life, to disobey her parents and to sacrifice everything for Romeo. Her life is certainly very different to Romeo. He has a lot of freedom at the city and can walk around. We actually barely see Romeo's parents. Montague comes on stage a couple of times, whereas Capulet and his wife are present throughout the play talking to Juliet. And that's because she has no freedom to leave the house without her parents' leave. She doesn't even have permission to go to church, to go to confession, without them allowing her to. And she's kept indoors, which is not uncommon for Italian families at this time. Young daughters were very useful in political alliances, and they were often kept indoors and kept away from society until such time that they could be married off. So we can interpret Juliet's actions as the fact that she is just so in love with Romeo that she will do anything for him, but there's also an interesting angle that she has been kept inside her whole life, and when she says, "I would die for love," I mean, is this the most amount of passion that has ever happened to her? And is there some excitement in her disobeying her parents and deciding to run away with Romeo, and finally being a wife rather than a daughter? Despite being called the most lamentable tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, there's also so much comedy in it. A lot of it comes from Mercutio, Romeo's friend, who is very loud, again very charismatic, very witty, and a massive fan of dick jokes. There is sexual humour throughout Romeo and Juliet, which can seem a little bit at odds with the romantic side to it and with its ultimately tragic end. And these comic relief characters actually appear all over the place. There's also Juliet's nurse, who is to Juliet like a counterpart of what Mercutio is to Romeo, and there is a lot of bawdy humour coming from her, whether or not she actually realises it. We know that Capulet has a long-standing feud with Montague. We don't know why. We don't know if this is an argument which happened before their time or if it's an argument that happened between these two men. But his character is also quite changeable. At the beginning, we see him fighting with Montague, and then later on at his ball, his nephew Tybalt recognises that Romeo and Montague has snuck in amongst their midst, and he tells Tybalt just to let it go and let him have fun, and he seems very okay with Romeo being there. And then later on again, he's very insistent that Juliet marry Paris, who is the man of his choice, and gets very angry when she tries to disobey him. And it's something that's a little bit unexplored in the play, that we see so much of Capulet's character and yet so little of Montague's. And the final character of note is Friar Lawrence, and because we don't see a lot of Montague, Friar Lawrence acts as this fatherly figure to Romeo. He gives him a lot of advice, and it's through his scheming that he devises this way for these lovers to be together. An interesting interpretation of Friar Lawrence, especially from the original translation of the Romeo and Juliet story, is that he's Catholic, and everybody in Italy is Catholic. And in England at this time, the Church of England's religion is Protestantism. Catholicism is bad. We do not like it right now. And Friar Lawrence is quite an interesting character. And although he is a man of the church, he encourages Romeo and Juliet to get married a day after meeting each other. He performs this weird wedding in secret, and then he devises his way for them to run away. And I don't know that that marriage would necessarily be seen as legal, or at least not a very honest one. And if we're going to have this dishonest wedding happening, it's important that the character doing that isn't Protestant and is Catholic, so that we can justify that a man of the true church would not be acting in this way. He's also full of other inconsistencies as a character, and although he's married them within a day, he tells them not to be hasty and to slow down, and it's not very sound advice necessarily that he's giving. There are a lot of themes running through the play, and most of them are about opposites. So we have the Montagues and the Capulets. There's lots of themes of day and night and love and hate and old people and young people, and there's a lot of contrast. Some of the overriding themes throughout the play are the links between love and death and fate. Fate plays a very important role in this play. Even from the beginning, we have the prologue, and Romeo and Juliet are described as star-crossed lovers who are going to take their life. Star-crossed meaning the stars' fate. There's a lot of links between the stars and what's written in the stars. Their love is called death-marked. And we as the audience know the end of the play before it's even begun. And that's quite interesting because throughout the play, there's a lot of hope. You do sort of believe that Romeo and Juliet can still be together. Romeo doesn't get killed by Tybalt, who goes to seek him out and to kill him in exchange for gate-crashing his uncle's feast. He escapes that, and even though he kills Tybalt, he's only banished, he's not killed himself. Juliet escapes being married to Paris. Even at the end, when Juliet is in the tomb and you know that Romeo thinks she's dead and he intends to kill himself, there's an element of stalling time there. You think if Friar Lawrence can just get there in time to stop Romeo, it can all be all right, even though from the beginning of the play, we know that this ends with both of them dead. There's also an element of Romeo and Juliet both knowing their fate and knowing that their love is a little bit doomed and trying to pull against it. In the scene where Romeo is leaving Juliet for Mantua, she is saying things like, oh, there's a bird calling, but that's not the lark, it's the nightingale. It's still night, it's not morning yet. And there's a lot of, don't let it be morning, it's still nighttime and we're safe in the dark. And there's a consistent feeling of them trying to stop the inevitable. They cannot keep it night when it's going to be day. Juliet cannot stop Romeo from being a Montague as much as she wants him to not be. The most obvious theme of the play is love. However, Romeo and Juliet's actual relationship, I'm not sure warrants the romanticism that we have put on it in the following years. They're actually incredibly young, and their love and the way they act is incredibly childish. Now there's a question as to whether this is intentional or not, whether as the audience we are meant to look at Romeo and Juliet and see their actions as silly, see them as being too young for all of the emotions that they're feeling, and also maybe if Juliet followed her parents' wishes, she wouldn't have ended up dead, she could have been married to Paris, and so that it was their own childish behaviour which has caused their deaths. Or you could flip that on its head and say that Romeo and Juliet are acting for love and they are doing the right thing. And really, it's the older people who have made this framework, which means that Romeo and Juliet cannot be together and that their love story cannot end happily. And then there's the question of cause and effect. I mean, this love was doomed from the start. We know that as the audience. But why was it doomed? Is it doomed because of the feud between Capulets and the Montagues? We see a lot of fighting between them. However, we don't really understand where this feud has come from. And in reality, Romeo and Juliet themselves never tell anybody that they're together. It's not like Capulet has found out that his daughter is going out with a Montague and therefore hates him and locks her away. All of the rest of the characters are just going about their daily lives, unaware that Romeo and Juliet have married. The only people that know this are Friar Lawrence and the nurse. And even at the end, when everybody's found to be dead, people sort of aren't really believing Friar Lawrence when he tells them, oh, this is what happened, this is why they're all dead. So is it the feud itself that caused their story to end badly? Or is it the fact that the feud exists means that they are keeping their marriage under wraps and means that they're meeting in secret? If Tybalt had known that Romeo was married to Juliet, would he have gone out to kill him? Is it because Romeo and Juliet themselves are acting foolishly and impetuously, and the people, the nurse and the friar who are giving them advice, are quite foolish characters themselves? Is that why it ends badly? Does it end badly because of male bravado? I mean, a lot of the fights that happen are from the young men. The death count is highest among all of the young male characters in the play. The only reason that Mercutio dies is because Romeo is trying to not fight Tybalt, who wants to fight him, and the rest of his friends say, well, we must, otherwise we will lose face. And so they all fight, and it's just kind of an extension of this testosterone and these young men fighting each other. Similarly, Capulet gets incredibly angry when Juliet says that she does not want to marry Paris, and it's a very quick loss of temper, and he is enraged by the fact that his daughter is not doing what he wants her to do. Perhaps he would lose face if his daughter is not obedient as she should be. I mean, do all these things happen because there is a feud in place? Or is the feud more irrelevant, and is it more about just the male posturing that is happening with the young men in the street, with the older men with their status? Could that be the situation which caused the feud in the first place? There is so much more that I could say about Romeo and Juliet, as there is about all of Shakespeare's plays, but I would love to hear from you, your thoughts on the text, whether you like it, whether you don't. I must say, to read, it's not my favourite Shakespeare. I think it reads quite messily because there's a lot of jumps between comedy and tragedy, and that might work well to create dramatic effect on stage, but when you're reading it, it's a little bit all over the place. What's your favourite adaptation of Romeo and Juliet that you've seen? I think mine still might actually be the Baz Luhrmann film, but I have not seen that many adaptations of this one, so I'd love to hear your recommendations. This series will be back in a few weeks' time, where I'll be doing a video on how to read Shakespeare for all of those of you that struggle with the language. But if there's any requests that you have for this series, any plays you'd like me to focus on, any aspects of Shakespeare you'd like, then let me know in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Bye!